Welcome to the History Podcast, where we're going to be talking about World War I things.
Yes, today's topic we'll be talking about German U-boats.
Yes, U-boats were a very spectacular invention during World War I.
Yes, the term U-boat is commonly referred as an undersea boat, and U-boats could typically go under the water and sink Allied ships.
Today we'll be interviewing some people that have worked with U-boats.
Yeah, we'll be interviewing two people. We'll be interviewing a U-boat engineer and a U-boat driver or crewman, depending on which one decides to show up.
We'll be right back for the interviews right after these commercials.
Adios!
Hey, engineer!
Hello, buddies!
Welcome to the show. Take a seat.
Oh, very cool.
Got a few questions for you today.
Yes, what are they?
What was the average effective range for a torpedo you guys had?
Well, the engineers designing, we don't really know the range of it. It could probably go for a few hundred miles, but the effective range for sinking a ship was probably 75 to 150 meters away from the target.
How many U-boats did you guys create during the war?
If I recall correctly, we made a little over 375 U-boats.
How many torpedoes did each U-boat carry?
That's a good question. If the torpedoes vary depending on how big the U-boat was. The typical U-boat was a little over 200 feet and could usually hold 10 to 20 torpedoes. The smaller U-boats that were like 100 feet could hold about 5 to 10 torpedoes that worked.
How many men did you operate in one U-boat?
It took 30 to 60 depending on how big the U-boat. As I said, it varied, but usually the average one that I said previously was 200 feet. It usually needed about 45 men for it to operate properly.
How deep could you go with your U-boats?
Usually our U-boats could dive to about 200 to 250 feet below the surface, but if it was an emergency and we needed to dive, we could dive to about 400 feet before the U-boats would break under the pressure and kill all the crew members.
How were you able to make the U-boats withstand the water pressure at that depth?
Our U-boats were made of a strong, watertight steel cylinder known as a pressure hold. This kept the U-boat intact when we dived deep and kept the pressure inside relatively the same.
How were your U-boats able to move through the water, and how did they get above and below the surface?
Oh, our U-boats were like any other ships on the surface. We moved by a propeller, and we had a rudder which could steer it. But in order to go up and down, we had buoyancy, which we used a balance tank on the U-boats. When it was empty, the U-boats would rise to the surface and vice versa. So when it was full, it would sink down. In order for it to surface while we were underwater though, we would blow compressed air into the ballast and force water out of the tank, which was a pretty complicated process we had.
How were your U-boats able to see other ships and to sink them?
That was one of my favorite inventions, and I designed it personally. We installed periscopes into the boat so we could just rise out of the surface just for a few inches and be able to see the ships right below the waves. We had two types of periscopes on the U-boat: an attack periscope for observing and targeting ships, and on the surface, another periscope that was used for scanning the horizon to make sure there were no aircraft in the vicinity while we sank the ships, because that'd be a real problem if we had other ships spotting us while we were trying to ship. We were also able to put lenses in the periscope, my bright idea, so we could zoom in on the enemy ships. But sadly, they were not very effective, so we had to get pretty close range in order to clearly see the ship and see what side it is on.
Well, is that all?
Well, that's about all I can tell you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being on the show today. Have a great day.
You too, sir.
Wow, that was great.
Yeah, we got a lot of good information out of that talk.
Yeah, I really loved how he said the U-boats rose and sank in the water.
Yeah, that took a lot of ingenuity to design that. My favorite part was probably the periscopes. That was very smart of them to install that on those ships.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yes, next we'll be interviewing another person associated with the U-boats. Who is it again?
Oh yeah, we got lucky today. We got another German U-boat driver who decided to show up out of nowhere, so we'll be interviewing him right after this commercial.
Adios, amigo. Welcome, German U-boat driver. Is it okay if we ask you some questions today?
Yep.
Well, how many Allied ships were you able to sink during the war?
More than 6,000, over 12.5 million tons of supplies.
Wow. So when and why did you start using the U-boats against the Allies?
We started on September 5th, 1914, because the British made a blockade to keep the supplies out of Germany. So we needed the U-boats to sink their ships. And then we made a blockade around there, unrestricted submarine warfare, and we sank any ship in the British Isles.
Okay. So what kind of ships did you guys mostly target?
Convoys that were carrying supplies for the Allies.
So did you guys encounter any problems during the U-boat campaigns? And if so, what were they?
Oh yes, one of the earliest problems was the British would disguise their merchant ships, and they'd arm them with guns to sink our British ships, the U-boats. They would fire on us and take us down. Luckily, some of us were able to see it through and sink them from a distance or avoid them entirely.
Did you guys encounter any other problems during the war?
Yeah, near the end of the war, Allies had much more success when it came to sinking us. They would send depth charges down in the sea and blow us up, and we had just no way of avoiding it.
Wow. So how many U-boats did the Allies sink during the war?
More than 60% of our fleet were sunk by the British methods used against us.
Dang. So how are the living conditions in the U-boats?
They were horrible. We couldn't bathe, shower, do anything. And all of our space was taken up by food and torpedoes, so we had to eat our way for space. And the mental toll was terrible on men. Men would go mad.
Wow, that's pretty bad. So how were you able to pull through conditions like this and still be so effective?
We just knew we had to do it for the mother country, Germany, because we were like the main key of this war. If we sank those ships, we were able to do stuff and stop supplies from getting to the Allies. It was very important.
So what happened to your U-boats after the war?
We were supposed to not use them anymore, but we hid them away and started using them again during World War II.
Wow, thank you for your time.
Yes.
Man, today was amazing. We learned so much about U-boats.
Yes, we gained so much knowledge, and I hope you guys learned much too.
Yeah, so interesting. Anyway, guys, that's all we have today for the History Podcast, so see you next time.
See you next time.